Good evening and welcome to today's Tropics for September 20th, 2022. Please note, I am not a meteorologist and this video is just a collection of my thoughts and opinions about the storms I'm talking about, and for any decision making, please consult the National Hurricane Center or your local officials. I also apologize for the lateness of this video. I had some computer issues, mostly with my mouse not working and not pairing to it. So, yeah, that's made it kind of late. Yeah, for that, I apologize. But anyway, the Atlantic is coming alive right now. We have four systems that are currently formed or are being watched for formation, and these systems are Hurricane Fiona, which is currently just north of the Turks and Caicos Islands. It was over that area much of the day today, and has been creating some pretty bad impacts there. We also have Tropical Storm Gaston. It's currently in the middle of the ocean. It's not going to have major land impacts. May impact the Azores Islands down the road, but it's not a huge major threat that we have to worry about. Then there's Invest 98L, which doesn't look too good right now, but has definite potential to be quite a strong storm down the line. And finally, a wave over Africa, which should come on shore, take a kind of weird track to the north, but has the potential to become a short-lived tropical depression or storm. It kind of goes north and eventually decays over this cooling SSTs. So let's first take a look at Hurricane Fiona. So this has really been ramping up today, especially lately. You can see it's starting to really look impressive on satellite imagery and infrared imagery here. You can see, the eye has cleared up pretty nicely. It's not perfect, it's not perfectly round and not perfectly, very quick clear. It's cleared up a little bit, but it's still got a little bit of work to do. But it's got a nice round CDO. It's gotten pretty, convection has gotten pretty deep, so it's a pretty impressive cyclone. It's almost a category 4 at this point. Got a recon mission in here, and that's showing it's got a wind of around 110 knots. So it's a high-end category 3. Very impressive looking. I got a nice kind of band up here to the east and northeast of this cyclone. That makes sense given that there is some southwesterly shear that seems to have kind of shrugged off, but that means you kind of have this convective activity that's kind of favored on that side. Anyway, we do have this recon mission in here, and it's finding some pretty decently strong winds, and it's moving generally northward, maybe a bit west of north. So it is trying to recurve. It's slowly moving more and more northward until it starts moving eastward as well. And yeah, it's pretty strong winds. Pressure has been getting lower with each pass, so it's steadily intensifying. I think the last drops on here suggested a pressure of 947 millibars, and so it's been going down about 2 or so millibars per hour. So it's pretty decent intensification or deepening, I should say, and it should continue to do so for a little bit until perhaps there's another eyewall replacement cycle or the shear starts ramping up. Let's see about that. So what it's supposed to do in the near term is kind of try to recurve. There's a very troughy pattern off the east coast right now, and so there's no way it's going to like turn to the left because there isn't really a whole lot in the way of ridging. So it's kind of get drawn up north by that troughiness, and then we'll have this very deep trough kind of come down from Canada and dig down into the east coast, and that will pick up Fiona and get it to travel more to the east, and eventually it will try and phase with Fiona over or near Atlantic Canada, and that could provide some major impacts for that region, and that's why it's something to watch, because it could be a pretty severe extratropical storm as it gets into that area. as for the kind of atmospheric conditions, uh, they're not like totally great, but they're not the worst either. There's some of that southwesterly shear we've seen a lot today. It's managed to build a core despite that, and it's managed to strengthen, but there is some of that southwesterly shear, and it's going to be dealing with that pretty much for the rest of its time as a tropical cyclone. However, with that southwesterly shear from the trough, it's also got a nice jet interaction here, and that will provide some decent upper level divergence, and that's what's keeping it strong. What's probably helping it strengthen despite the shear, and in the near term, it's probably going to try and or it's probably going to increase and get a lot more potent. But with that potent jet interaction, it'll also start getting a bit less tropical. It'll start getting a much larger wind field, and eventually it'll transition to an extratropical cyclone. And it looks like that'll happen probably at the end of the week into the weekend when it really gets caught up in that trough that tries to phase. And with that phase, it becomes quite an impressive cyclone here. A lot of the model runs we see are taking it to like 920 millibars, or 930, something like that. Very, very powerful, likely hurricane force, extratropical low coming into Atlantic Canada. So this is a pretty strong signal for that. And what that's going to cause is it's going to cause a lot of storm surge because this has been a pretty decent hurricane for a few days now. It's going to be it's going to be growing quite large. So that's going to be kind of carrying a big bubble of water with it, and that's going to contribute to some of the storm surge. It's also going to cause some very heavy rain. So it's going to be carrying a lot of that deep tropical moisture up into Atlantic Canada. So you're going to have heavy rain as it comes up there, possibly flooding along with that storm surge. And of course, with a system this deep, you're also going to have those very, very sharp wind gradients and likely some strong, possibly damaging winds. So that's definitely something you should be keeping an eye on up here in Atlantic Canada because it looks like within the next 4 to 5 days there could be a pretty significant extratropical low up in the area from the remnants of Fiona. If we look at the official NHC cone, it's expected to kind of make that turn more to the east, pass it a little bit west of Bermuda, and turn more left as it phases with that trough and eventually affects Atlantic Canada. So we have those tropical storm and hurricane warnings up for Turks and Caicos and some of the Bahamas, since it's still affecting those regions. But eventually it should move to the north, and impacts ongoing from there will decrease. We actually have some tropical storm watches in Bermuda because although it looks like it'll be missing Bermuda, it won't actually, the actual core of it won't go over Bermuda, rather past the west. Uh, it will be quite a strong cyclone still. And remember, as it goes north, it will becomes increasingly larger. So it's probably going to have a very large wind field as it passes by Bermuda. So it doesn't have to be near the core for it to still experience strong winds, uh, potentially heavy rain, and some of that storm surge. So it could be still something to watch. And if you have interest in Bermuda, you should be wary of this because it could be impactful even though it's passing to the west. And of course, we'll have the impact for Atlantic Canada into the weekend. So any preparations for the storm should be kind of underway now because it is coming, and we've only got a few days before those impacts start to set in. Now, next up, let's take a look at Invest 98L. Right now, it's not looking the greatest. A lot of its convection has kind of gone away in the past day. You can also see some northerly shear here, and that's thanks to the outflow from Fiona. So yeah, it's not looking too hot today, but it's got quite a lot of potential in the future, and it's got a few things going for it right now. You can see, if you switch to the water vapor imagery, you can see very, very divergent flow. You've got this upper anticyclone here, and you got the kind of northeasterlies coming up here, and then you've got the upper trough and associated southwesterly winds aloft here. And what you get in the middle of it, you get a lot of upper divergence here, and so that favors rising air, uh, surface convergence, something getting going, and perhaps something trying to spin up. And you can see the past day or so, convection has tried to spin up something. It looks like in low cloud fields, there is kind of like some sort of a circulation here. So it's at least a partial kind of thing trying to get going here. We had an ace cap pass quite a while ago this morning, and it did show a close circulation, but it was elongated, and yeah, we haven't found evidence to say that's gotten like organized enough to be a TC, but that's part of the way there, and perhaps if it has decent effective trends in the near term, it could potentially form a tropical cyclone as it gets in the Caribbean. It's got a 70% chance to form in the next 2 days from the NHC and a 90% chance to form in the next 5 days. So for the next little while, the near term, the conditions don't look all that great for it because of actually Fiona and its outflow. And what we're going to have here is this kind of northeasterly flow, very strong northeasterly flow that gets into the Caribbean. And so what's going to happen to Invest 98L for the first few days in the Caribbean is it's going to be hit by very strong very strong northeasterly shear. It's not a very common shear vector for the Caribbean. Usually it's that westerly shear, but here we got northeasterly shear, and so that's going to keep it kind of from doing a whole lot in the next few days. It's going to keep it probably on the weaker side, like even the GFS, which is kind of bullish on near-term development. It kind of keeps it from going much below, say, 1,000 millibars while it's being sheared, and that makes sense because it's going to struggle with this amount of it. And yeah, it's going to kind of be like that steady state, maybe as a wave, maybe as a weak TC. Well, we'll see about that until we start getting into the weekend. And once you get in the later part of the weekend, suddenly that anticyclone isn't going to be quite as strong, and it's not going to be pushing a lot of northeasterly wind aloft into Invest 98L. And then once it starts getting into the central and the western Caribbean, it's going to have a very, very favorable looking sort of upper level pattern here. Yeah, this is about as good as it gets, really, uh, in in this part of the basin too. You got kind of trough dipping down from the Conus region, so eventually that you can tap into that, and you've got an outflow channel to the northeast here, a poleward one. Got this upper low behind here, and that kind of helps to get rid of some of the outflow. And then like right here, and also you have a nice equatorward outflow area to the east Pacific. So this is a very divergent, very low shear look, very, very favorable sort of look here. So this definitely has a high ceiling once it gets into the northwestern Caribbean, likely late in this weekend, early next week. We'll see it really start to organize and probably intensify in what's likely to be quite the favorable environment in the Caribbean. Now, the big question is, what does it look like going in this environment? Now, the GFS is really running ahead of most of the model guides, and it has a weak tropical storm kind of getting into that area, and it takes a couple of days, but eventually it becomes a pretty strong storm as it starts to curve a little bit to the north, more than north. On the other hand, you have the euro here, which doesn't like it as much in the near term, keeps it a wave for a while, and once it gets into that region, it too forms it and becomes reasonably strong as it too curves to the north. So it doesn't really matter what it looks like getting into that region, as long as it somehow doesn't become nothing at all, which seems highly unlikely at this point. We're probably going to have an intensifying system in the northwestern Caribbean. All this kind of difference would really mean is it might take a little while for it to consolidate and form in the central Caribbean rather than getting going immediately if it was our actual TC, like the GFS says. We'll have some time to see if that happens. In the short term, it has tried to form uh, a bit closer to the what the GFS has said, but sometimes it gets a little overzealous with stuff like this. So we'll see about that. Uh, but and then once it gets into the northwestern Caribbean, it's also one of the this kind of trough here. It's also going to not only ventilate it, but it's also going to try to draw it up north, and that's why you kind of have the curve more northwestward, kind of in towards the 1 week out on the models. And yeah, this will kind of likely take it up and try to get into the Gulf of Mexico and perhaps threaten some part of the Gulf Coast. But it seems like some of the signal, the model signal, kind of getting a little too far out here, but some of the model signal kind of takes us out to sea and has this ridge come in, build build in, not quite strongly enough to say turn it to the west, but enough so that it kind of doesn't recurve out to sea quickly and kind of more slowly moves in the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah, we'll have to see about that. It's kind of too early to look at that, but it's something to kind of consider and see. So here's a really good plot from Tomer Berg here, and this shows the ensembles from several different model suites, and yeah, you can see this kind of moving west northwestward into the Caribbean, maybe kind of a nudge a bit more to eastward, perhaps as it struggles with that northeasterly shear that kind of favors it to not gain a lot of latitude, and then eventually you have it going eastward, and then as the trough kind of starts to make itself known, you have that right turn up northwest and going into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, at this point, you can see how wide the kind of distribution is. You have stuff that's like in Central America. You have stuff that's in the Bahamas. Now, so those are kind of more extreme solutions, but at this point, there's a lot of uncertainty, and so you shouldn't like be super worried about this quite yet because we don't even have a storm yet, and the uncertainty is still pretty high, as it usually is this far out. But in general, what this does say is there's probably the potential for type of or some type of hurricane probably to threaten some part of the Gulf Coast, especially the somewhere to the east. So like yeah, northeastern Gulf Coast. At this point, I wouldn't like be very like worried, but it's probably worth just keeping an eye on this and making sure you've got your kind of seasonal preparations in that you probably should have done before June 1st, because it's better to be prepared then than right before a storm. But right now it's a little too early, and the main thing to be worried about is, say, the impacts to the Windward Islands and Trinidad and Tobago and the northern coast of Venezuela, where you'll see probably some perhaps heavy rain and squalls and some gusty winds. And then eventually, in the next few days, once it perhaps starts ramping up the Caribbean, then we can take a closer look to what's further beyond. Yeah, otherwise there isn't too much of that's very notable in the tropics. So that's about it for tonight. If you have any questions or comments about my video, please let me know. Thanks for watching.